When I started to work as a young psychologist, as I'm still today, I had an opportunity to work with children, parents, and teachers through implementation of Child Assault Prevention Program. It is called CAP, and it is implemented throughout the world. For some times, Croatia was second best in the world by the total number of children involved into the program, right behind Japan. But then, Chinese Child Protection Services found out about the program. Needless to say, we were overrun. But why I started to tell you this story is because I felt injustice. Injustice because all children in Croatia could not participate in this or any other evidence-based program. It depended on the pure luck and goodwill of teachers, schools, communities who will fund the program. I could not wrap my head around how a country that ratified Convention on the Right of the Child and following protocols that has very progressive policies toward protection of a child from violence, that even ban the corporal punishment, would lack planning and implementation of child prevention programs for all children and especially the vulnerable ones. Yet, they have left something so important for kids and teens to learn how to stand for themselves and to seek support, to pure resourcefulness of the schools, kindergartens, communities, or the NGO where I have worked. What made me even more angry was when I talked to adults who had reported violence, were telling me stories how the child protection system was often incoherent, with numerous administrative obstacles, often had no clear rules and procedures, and it lacked human, technical, and financial resources. Moreover, sometimes it even lacked humanity and empathy within the system itself. UNICEF defines the child protection system enables access to vital social services and fair justice system to every child starting at birth. Vital social services and fair justice system. Protection of a child cannot be perceived as one person or one department job. But why does it often feel like you are all alone? In systematic review, Hills and his colleagues stated that over 1 billion children experienced it, neglect, violence, and abuse. And that's half of a child population in the world in previous year. Children experience violence in their homes, their schools, their neighborhoods, and across the system. Research that we implemented with children and young people and adults in Croatia during the fall 2020 aimed in better understanding of social and gender norms that contribute to occurrence of violence within the schools. And also, role of children in challenging these norms. However, this research showed us the bigger picture and the structural problem that I only started to grasp as a young psychologist. The lack of trust into the system that leads to feeling of helplessness. When we sat with children and gave them our ears, children started to tell us stories. Beautiful, heartwarming stories about their friendships, pieces, places, and people they hold dear. But also, they told us worrying stories, upsetting stories, where you can feel the air getting thicker and that you may feel unprepared for the things you will hear. They told us how some teachers verbally abuse them and say to them things like, "You look like a dead plant," or "You are a spoiled brat." They told us stories about the city bus where elder pupils throw out freshmen out of the bus onto the street, and where young girls are being sexually harassed by older men. Needless to say that no one reacts and that the victim is left alone. They told us how they got used to verbal violence and that it almost became normal to them, how they know about organized fights outside the school. They told us about children and young people who are being molested and whose parents are abusive and violent, who sells and where you can buy drugs. They told us stories about if you are different in any way, if you're a member of some minority or gay, it is more likely that you will be a victim of violence. How elementary school sometimes looks more like prison than educational institution, locked during the lunch break so that pupils can't go out, with cameras constantly monitoring. How mass and social media contributes to aggressive behaviors, and how perpetrators brag how they get off with misdemeanor or even felony. Young people told us that they do recognize that there are double standards, and that the more influence and more money your families got, it is more likely that you will get away with various offenses. We were sitting in a circle with those young men. Stories were just pouring out of them. And they told us how they often witness violence. But they also told us how people, adults, even us, they say, sometimes turn their head away, look the other way, and the victim is often left alone and afraid. The same victim will often be blamed, like he or she provoked the violence, or that he or she is lying and exaggerating. And in cases that victims do get help and support, the system will often be slow and incoherent, and sometimes even distressing and unfriendly toward the victim and the witness of the violence. Much of my personal and professional life I have dedicated to elimination of abuse and violence against children. Unfortunately, as many of us, I have also been a victim of violence. I do not speak often about it because I can hear a thought in my head saying, "You will be seen as damaged goods." Just because my classmates thought that they could feel stronger and better by banging my body onto the school locker. The support that I got was in the form of lecture, not to meddle with older students and to mind my own business. As I was the responsible one, I felt so alone and so ashamed. Vicious circle, that is how children call transmission of fear on all structures. They recognize that fear makes children and adults to look the other way, to withdraw, to not take the stand, because they are afraid for themselves in dealings with institutions, in dealing with reporting, in dealing with court, in dealing with system in general. They recognize that fear produces helplessness from their inner circle and onwards, from their family home up to institutions that are supposed to guard them and keep their right to be safe. But how did we come from this elaborate legal framework, child right-oriented sets of values and norms, to being reluctant to turn for help and support from adults and institutions? This gives perspective that each man is for itself and that the system is unjust and unreliable. In our research, a young man said, "It is all very unfair to me. I feel like no one is helping anyone, but I see that it all goes through some connections." What I heard him say is, "I feel alone and afraid and helpless because I can't trust the system." Pinheiro, in his UN report, highlighted, "There can be no compromise in challenging violence against children, children's uniqueness, their human potential, their initial fragility and vulnerability, their dependence on adults for their growth and development, make an unassailable case for more, not less, investment in prevention and protection from violence." How do we build a stronger response in our communities, our child protection system, our national response? How do we break the wheel of helplessness? In 2015, I was running a project called Enhance the Right of Child to be Safe. I had an opportunity to work with think tank and trust of competent women and men who dedicated their professional careers to prevention and protection of children from violence. We were struggling to develop comprehensive yet easily manageable system that enables child protection services to be child right oriented and to progress towards zero violence in their communities. Here is what we have concluded. First, to progress towards zero violence, we should not tolerate violence, Back then and now, out of this research, what we have found out is that violence is very widespread and that children as well as adults are tolerating various types of violence. Secondly, we need to have the resources aiming at well-being of children. That means sufficient human, financial, and technical resources. Professionals and practitioners that participated in our research stated that they do see the difference in those schools and communities that implemented evidence-based program, civil rights curricula, and social justice programs. They told us that they see the shift in the norms towards zero violence and more open society in that communities. Third is the necessity that every citizen, and especially educational and CPS employee, knows the law that binds them to promote and protect the right of a child to be safe. Back then, we have found out that barely half of kindergarten and school employees know about their legal obligation to report violation of children's rights. Data shows that 1/3 of them have never, not once, participated in any kind of education that empowers them to recognize, react, and report violence against children. And sometimes they are the persons with whom children spend the most of their day. Fourth is the necessity that each and one that is involved into child protection, from the safe caregiver up to teacher, social worker, police officer, attorney, and the judge, acts on the laws that bind them. You may say, what? You need to tell people to act on a law? Well, yes. Irrespective of the decisive legal framework and their obligation to report violence, research shows that kindergarten and school employees rarely act on it, and they provide justification for it, like they could resolve situation by their own, or they think that the system is slow and incoherent, or that they are afraid of dealings with court and the system. Fifth, you guess, cooperation, intersectoral cooperation. We need to have holistic approach in dealings with children. Child protection is not one person or one institution job. It would be like you're fixing well-being of a child by treating his arm or his leg. Bar House and similar initiatives are increasingly recognized as the right way forward, where we put child into the center of our intervention. At the end of our research, we asked the young people how they see that we can build a more open, tolerant, and society that progresses towards zero violence. One of them told us that everything that we tell to you adults, you don't turn into lesson. Today, still being a young psychologist, an optimistic one, I call each and one of you to the action. Let us stop, turn things into empty words and lessons, and let us create and enable support system for children and young people that they deserve. By building a strong and competent CPS, more trust can be restored within the system, so that no child, no woman, or no man would ever feel alone, afraid, and helpless. We owe it to the child uniqueness, their human potential, and the society we want to build for them. Thank you.